back, everyone, to our afternoon session of the Generosity365 Academy. Trust you had a good break, and we look forward to 2 additional workshops with learning and insights and engagement. So I'm going to introduce you now to Keith Mundy and Ken Sloane, who are presenting our workshop, How Online Giving Helps Congregations Fund Ministry. Keith has been a member of the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America for over 20 years and currently serves as Program Director for Stewardship. He has been involved with the creation of many resources, including the Generosity Project, Cultivating Generous Congregations, Rediscover Macedonia, Make It Simple, Stories to Tell and Gifts to Share, Money Leadership for Thriving Congregations, Ventures in Growing Stewards, and the How-To Guide for Stewardship Competencies. He serves in leadership roles for the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, coaching ministry, mission interpretation, and their preferred render program. Also Lutherans Restoring Creation and the Ecumenical Stewardship Center. Ken Sloane is the United Methodist Church's Director of Stewardship and Generosity, housed at the Disciples Ministries offices in Nashville, Tennessee. He's a clergy member of the Greater New Jersey Conference, where he served more than 20 years in local church ministry, including a successful church start and 5 years as Director of Connectional Ministries. He's been the Director of Communications Ministry in 2006, and now is serving as Director of Communications, Stewardship, and added Stewardship to that in October 2011. Sorry, Ken. He's author of Local Church Guidelines for Stewardship for 2017 to 2020, and a contributor to the Guidelines for Finance. So Keith and Ken, we welcome you both and look forward to what you're going to share with us today.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Our conversation today is going to focus on new channels of giving in the congregation. Now, the concept of channels or pathways of giving can take many forms for funding both current and future ministries and congregations. There were a lot of things that Keith and I talked about that we could have included in this, about regular offerings, about special and designated gifts, to talk about legacy gifts, denominational grants, other grants, partnership support, for-profit ventures. But we really believe that in the time that we're in right now, due to the change in the worship patterns due to COVID-19 and such, we really felt like the most important thing for us to focus on was the transition from traditional ways of giving by check or cash to those newer ways of giving that is going to become the new standard, we both believe, for the church. Electronic or e-giving is what we're going to be talking about.
So why do we think this is so important? Many of our congregations and many of your congregations have felt the impact of not passing the plate for several weeks. And many congregations are concerned about their financial stewardship. In my denomination, the ELCA, the majority of our contributions are in the form of regular giving to our ongoing ministry and special or designated giving to those other causes that are important to the respective congregation. On an annual basis, the combination of those two totals about $2.5 billion per year. And that number has fairly consistently grown. In fact, over the last 50 years, the amount of giving to congregations has only declined 5 times. So that's about 1 time every decade. We think, though, that 2020 might be a 6th year. It's a little early to tell, but indications are it could be. So I'd like to begin by just taking a moment and looking at some of the ways that giving has evolved. We know, of course, that cash contributions and material contributions or gifts in kind have been around for a long time. The first checks were used in about 1681 when some cash-strapped businessmen in Boston, Massachusetts mortgaged their land to a fund against which they could write a check. The first printed checks are traced back to a British banker, Lawrence Childs, about 1762. Moving ahead, we might be more familiar with the use of credit cards. Credit cards were first introduced in 1949 by Frank McNamara after he had a frustrating time paying for his meals while he was traveling. And what he developed became known as the Diners Club card. The first plastic credit card, was rolled out in 1959. Those are things that we're more familiar with. But then we get into some more recent developments. It was in 2009 that cryptocurrency began with a currency called Bitcoin. And then in 2014, Apple introduced mobile pay with a digital wallet, and some other versions of that have come out. So what we're finding is that there are some very long established proven methods of making gifts, making payments, and there are some new emerging methods. Our focus today is going to be on electronic giving. We're going to begin by addressing some questions that we identified that we think are pretty relevant, offer our reflections and discoveries as we've done some research around those, and then invite you to be asking us some questions, which we'll try to cover at the end of our time together. So Ken, where would you like to start talking about electronic or e-giving?
Well, let me say first, Marcia, I know this is kind of a procedure question. Are you going to put our slides up, or do you need me to do that?
It's whatever you prefer, Ken.
Well, if you can put them up, that probably would be great.
Okay, just give me a moment.
Thank you.
I'm still here, just so you
Okay.
know.
Okay. I can do it if you want. If it's easier for you to do it.
Right, so I think you only sent me the portion with notes.
Okay. All
But
right.
I can do that. I'm just working on getting the.
I can get this one up because I have it open on my laptop. It's good.
Okay.
And
All
I will
right.
go
Well,
ahead and
then
do
I
that.
will let you do that.
All right. Sorry about that. I just didn't know. I don't know when I launch this whether my notes are going to disappear, and I have my notes in another spot as well. So.
Okay.
All right. Let me go to this. Share that. Okay. And if I do this, we'll go to full screen. There we go. Is that going to work? Is that working for everybody?
It's not quite full screen.
Not quite full screen. Okay. Are you seeing my presenter view? Is that what's happening?
Right. You need to change it to a slideshow. I think you'll be okay.
Does that improve?
Yes.
That's good?
Good.
Okay. Let me move it ahead here. Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about the many faces of digital giving. What is it? Well, it basically is that opportunity that we have to give electronically, taking the place of what we were doing before, which was, writing checks, as Keith had indicated, or putting cash into the offering plate. Really, when you talk about, Keith talked about the birth of checks and things like that and credit cards. I think one of the significant things to talk about is an event that happened. One of those events like we're in now that kind of changed the world around. And that was an event that really brought about what we call the death of checks. And that was 9/11 in 2001. Because after 9/11, what happened was before 9/11, banks could only accept the original check. And those original checks had to be moved all the way around. Well, during the time after 9/11, there was about $46 billion worth of checks that were unaccounted for because they were traveling as people were moving around. And after 9/11, they passed what they called the Check 21 Act, which basically said that a facsimile of a check could be used instead. And from that point on, the use of checks has continued to kind of decline in the process. Online opportunities for bill paying and giving were in the works at the time, but this really kind of secured a pattern for what the future and the possibilities would be around e-giving. And so as more and more people begin paying bills and things like that online, the point came to be that pretty much the only check a lot of people were writing out anymore was their check to the church. In the midst of that, the advent of debit cards came out, and we found more and more people were traveling without cash in their pocket for security reasons. And all of these things contributed to this opportunity for the churches to embrace digital giving. And so in its many forms, you can think about it in terms of online and mobile and text. Basically online, picking an online vendor to handle electronic giving, and then being able to access that same online giving through a mobile device, through a smartphone, or to be prompted to go to that page through a text. And so again, many churches are using a combination of those three to do that. There are some other opportunities in electronic giving where we look at the idea of a kiosk, which many churches invested in, a place to have people come into the church in the narthex and lobby, whatever, swipe a card and make a donation on a screen. Very compact version of that would be a tablet or a phone that's on site in a church, and an opportunity where people can make that decision by themselves in a way too, to be able to do that card swipe there. Some products are even coming out called dipping, where now that we have the chips in the card, it's not so much a swipe as someone passes something to you, you dip your card in it or tap it in the electronic place, and then enter the amount that you're going to give. And as Keith hinted, kind of a new variation of that is what sort of came to birth with Apple and Apple Pay, is this idea of instant pay, where through different apps like Venmo and Cash and Zelle and Apple Pay and some others, people can instantly send money from one person's account to another person's account, and it shows up from phone to phone. It's done kind of like a texting of money, in the same way that people used to send money through Western Union. And the last one that we want to mention is one that is has an interesting twist. In a way, it's electronic giving, but it kind of builds itself on an older model, and that is people who have the opportunity to do bill pay from their accounts. In some cases, you can go to popular vendors and set up a way to pay their bill online. Your church may not be recognized by the bank as a place like that, but in many cases, the bank will actually send a check to the church, a digital check to the church, which again can kind of be deposited along with offerings and stuff. So many churches are encouraging their folks to look at that opportunity for a digital bill pay as a way to get money from their account into the church. And we'll talk a little later about the importance of the idea of recurring giving, of programmed giving, and bill pay can actually satisfy one of those program giving aspects, which I think is really important. Keith, tell us a little bit about your experience with the ELCA churches that you've been working with.
Right. So one of the things that we've tried to do is to monitor what has been some of the trend with these different kinds of e-giving. You'll see here on the screen, I've got 5 different kinds of e-giving, and we've tried to take a look at where were they at in 2017 and where are they at today. The percentages that you see there today is roughly the mix, and say what payment method are people choosing to use, and mobile apps, 47%. On the right is on the column there is the plus 800, means in the last 2 years, from the beginning of 2017 to the end of 2019, mobile giving has grown 800%. Online's grown 800, text by 200, swipe by 165, and kiosk by 170. Now, obviously, in some cases, there's a much different investment that's being made. In the case of mobile, everybody has their phone. They can do it that way easily. In the case of kiosk, there's an investment there, and that investment can vary anywhere from maybe $1,000 up to several $1,000s. So there's an investment there. But I think where we began to see that the pattern is going is that more and more it's going to be done using a mobile app over a phone. And that's probably the fastest growing segment. Now, we see that's important in congregations. And I'll give an example. I think of a couple of years ago, one of our younger pastors was in their first call up in a congregation in North Dakota, in a congregation, and it was a congregation that did not offer e-giving. And so she had some conversation with some people and suggested that they should begin doing that. The first year that they offered e-giving in their congregation, income in the congregation went up almost 50%.
Wow.
And what they noticed was the giving went up significantly among the younger households who did not use checks or cash, but now when you give them an e-giving option, they began giving on a regular basis. So that was a significant learning for that congregation, and it made a significant difference in their ministry to be able to increase that much in 1 year simply by adding e-giving. So that's one example that I can think of that shows how making this available can make a difference in the income of a congregation.
That's great.
Yeah. So how does this begin to take a look and relate to church management software? Ken, you've got a little look at that.
Yeah. So these are just some of the systems we talked about. There's way too many for us to begin to get down into the details of different church management software systems. But basically, the things that we want to be kind of talking about, even if you have in some cases, your church management system may have some opportunities or may have some natural connections to an electronic giving vendor or service provider. It doesn't necessarily mean that they have to be in the same suite of products, but their ability to connect is one of the things that we think is really important. So as you look at especially if you've already invested in your church management software, as you look at vendors, again, we'll be talking about that idea of how well does it interface with other systems that you have. If one of the things that I've found is when I talk to people about church management systems, I get questions about it all the time. Of course, in my job, I don't utilize any of these, so I don't come to it with any experience. When I talk to people about the church management systems they have, one of the things that people almost universally respond to you when you ask them, are you happy with it? They say, well, yes, sort of, it could be better or whatever. And I've never found anybody who said, oh, this is just the best thing in the whole wide world, because it's hard to embrace everybody's variety of different needs. Everybody's churches, as you know, are a little bit different, and we do things in a little bit different ways. But I think one of the things that you want to look for is you want to look for the best integration that you have. Again, if you already have an online provider and you're shopping for a new church management system, make sure that the donation portion of that church management system, the donation tracking part, is going to interface with the people who are providing your online giving support. I also, think that people need to look at things like the ease of use. The big difference now in a lot of the software, though, becoming kind of weighted on one side, is whether it's based on your church computer or whether it's housed in the cloud online, and that's the kind of access. There are a lot of advantages to both. There's some security that people feel about having it on a computer in the church, but there's a lot of flexibility that's offered, especially in a time like this. If people can access that software at any point, at any place with the right password and information, again, in a secure way for people who you want to be able to access that. So those are considerations to have. And the other part of this that I would put in is really, is data going to be able to be exported in a way that's going to be helpful for other people? In our United Methodist system that I work with, I always try to encourage to say, we have software now that allows each of our regional units, our annual conferences, 47 annual conferences in the US, to automatically upload data to our central offices here in Nashville. It happens at night. It's kind of done automatically as an upload. Well, I think I keep saying to people, eventually those regional units are going to want to have the same thing from their local churches. And so that ability to export, and Keith's shaking his head because, you know, when we're in this judicatory level, that's going to be one of the challenges that you face. Instead of having people have to complete forms, you know, every year to give us all this information, if they can just press a keystroke and upload it, that's an enormous help. So my suggestion would be, as you begin to look at church management software, you want to be concerned about electronic giving and donations and the future that's there, and a bunch of other factors. But it's also be helpful to talk to people who are in your judicatory roles and say, is there any particular software that's kind of rising to the top that you see is going to have a good future in integrating with whatever plans come along? So that's what I'd. Keith, do you have any thoughts to add to that?
Just a couple observations, in that this market is continually changing. 3 years ago, there were some pretty clear lines between those companies that were financial service providers for giving and those which are church management software. And what we see now is that church management software companies are buying giving processing companies, and giving processing companies are buying church management software companies. We've started to see that happen, which means they're merging together to become more effective for their own particular service, but then it creates unusual combinations or maybe different combinations of services that start to become more and more unique. So being able to figure out who's doing what now and what direction is that going is kind of important, because when we look at the selection of a church management software, there's a lot of time and money invested in that. So finding someone who you feel you can work with for a good 3 to 5 year period of time is very important. So Ken, we've also, you and I, in doing some preparation for this, took a look at some research that's been available, and you wanted to share some thoughts about some research that you found.
Sure. Let me move the slides along. Oh, my slides aren't moving here. What's going on? Wait a second. Try down here. There we go. Excuse me. So the report that I was going to share a little bit about comes from the Lake Institute, which many of you are familiar with. It's a part of the whole family of the Lilly School of Philanthropy. And they did a project back in 2019 called the National Study of Congregations' Economic Practices. The acronym for it is the NSCEP. And it was new research done with about, I believe it was about 1,200 congregations that were involved in that. They basically, this kind of describes some of the spread that they have. About 28% would be what you would call mainline. Evangelical Protestant was about 43%, 10% Roman Catholic, and they came up with a category. They grouped predominantly Black churches in the Protestant tradition, and separated them out, and they're about a 14% of that group. Real quick, to just give you kind of a background, this is kind of reflects what the variety of the sizes that they had. About 85% of the congregations were under 250, but you can see there was more than a third of them were under 50 in membership or attendance, I can't remember. Add to that another 26, and that would put the number that were actually 64% were fewer than 100. And then between 100 and 250, and then 250 to 1,000 and 1,000 or more, they're only about 3%. So as you look at some of these figures, you know, to understand that really the lion's share of them were churches of 250 or less, and about 2/3 of them almost were under 100 members. This is the size budgets, and you can see those numbers kind of are sort of reflective of what the other numbers indicated. 28% of the churches were small enough that their budget was under $100,000. Again, add another 33, and that'll take you up to about $250,000 budget. That was probably the largest in those two groups. And then from 250,000 up in the other stages, you'll see. So again, 78% received, this was income, excuse me, this was not their budgets, I apologize. 78% received less than $500,000 in total income during 2017, which was the data that was used in this collection process. But what I found really interesting, that was just to kind of give you a picture of what I found really interesting, was how money was received in those congregations. And so in those congregations, there was a percentage of rental income, a percentage from endowments, which you would expect. Individual donations obviously were about the biggest category at 81%. 6%, equal to almost what rental income was, came from special fundraisers the churches did. And about 3% of the income that they got was some kind of denominational support that was shared with them. The percentage of that came from sales and rental, as this was something I thought was interesting. The percent of these are U.S. congregations that receive some income from rent, and 62% of congregations are utilizing space in some way to not just to help fund their mission and ministry, but to make their space open to groups that need to use it. So on average, and this one was kind of surprising to me, and Keith and I talked about this because we do spend a lot of time talking about, moving to electronic giving, and especially recurring giving. But on average, about 78% of all giving still occurs during the worship service. Now that's a significant number to think about that. The diagram on the other side talks about all the different options, offering box, kiosk, and we see that passing the plate is still practiced in about 92% of the congregations that the study covered. But you'll see a growing presence in the idea of the smartphone app and text to give are in that process, again, of growing in popularity. But when we think about the fact that people's movement to give still happened, and this is back, a couple of years ago now, and 78% of the time during a worship service, it really reminds me about the importance of that moment in worship. Now, I've heard congregations say, well, we're not going to pass the more, we're going to an offering box, and then they kind of, in doing that, they don't have that offertory moment. Maybe they mention it in their announcements or something. But there's still something to be said about the fact of people being reminded and prompted during that worship time to make that offering, to do that act of giving in expression and gratitude. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a little bit when we're going to talk about what we're experiencing with streaming worship here and what we think might be happening in the future when we get through this whole COVID-19 time that we're in. So this was just a slide about the number of congregations that were engaged with an endowment. And what's happening really, 34% of the congregations have endowments, and 1/4 of the ones that they polled were using those endowments to a greater amount than 10% to support $10,000, support the ministry that they were doing. And this is, again, the age range of who had the endowments. The pre-World War II churches that were back to the beginning of the 1900s, 63% go back farther than that. And again, this is the age of the congregations, not the members. It's just really, you see that the endowments really follow the older the church is, the more they've built up their endowment in this time. So here's what Keith and I are kind of been talking a lot about. And this, I've come to kind of call this a gold standard in electronic giving. And how many congregations have the option to set up automatic recurring contributions via a bank or a credit card? And 55% of the churches that they had polled, of the 1,200 they had done, said yes, they do have that option for people to do that kind of recurring giving. 45% had not had that option put into place. And again, as we're living through these COVID-19 days, one of the first things I said to people is saying, hey, if you have electronic giving in place, you are already in better shape to weather this than many congregations who haven't even given consideration to it yet. And with my congregations that I work to, I've been relentless to say to people, you know, it was debatable up until now. Now it is no longer debatable about whether this is something your church needs to have. And so interesting number to see, again, that 55 have, but 45 in their study still hadn't make that decision. In my mind, the ultimate is that recurring electronic gift. It's dependable for your church. When I talk to churches that have adopted it in their first year, what they tell me is that they've seen that gap between what people pledge and what people actually give shrinks. And that's money that oftentimes they would not have recovered. Sometimes people say to me, well, isn't it kind of radical to ask people to go online and to set up a gift that's going to continue to give? And I say, my response to that is, well, if your church sends people a pledge card or an estimate of giving card, isn't that exactly what you're asking them to do? Is this any different that they do this online with your electronic giving service provider? They're asking to say, what is your intention to give over this coming year? They have an option if their situation changes to change it, just like we give them with a pledge card or an estimated giving card. But when you know that there's a reliable source of income in your church for mission and ministry, it makes an enormous difference. And again, we're seeing it right now in a situation that nobody could have predicted. I'm not blaming anybody because they didn't get this done before we went to the stay-at-home kind of model. But we're seeing right now the enormous value of that when we can't gather, to know that there's an income stream that we can depend on. So again, it's really, I think, such an important way for us to begin to look at that. Keith, you also, I think, have some research that you have been impressed with.
Just a couple thoughts on that last slide that you had, and that is, since March the 1st, a number of these online giving companies have had significant increase in the number of congregations who've come to them for service.
Yeah.
And as in the number, and I know a couple companies that they have had more than 1,000 congregations come to them in the last 7 weeks wanting to start using their service.
Wonderful.
So that's a change that is occurring.
Yeah. Yeah.
So yes, I've had a chance to look at some research. Some of you might be familiar with Vanco Payment Solutions. In the past, you might recognize their service had been called Simply Giving. It's a company that has been working with our ELCA congregations for over 20 years. And so we have a pretty strong base. Somewhere over 4,000 of our congregations use Vanco to provide service. And every year they do a study. And they call it the CHURCHGOER Giving Study, and they have some interesting results that they learn as they do that from year to year. One of these is that e-givers are more likely to make multiple gifts each month. And again, the thought that we want to plant here is convenience of making a giving. Convenience of making a giving. The next point here from their research is that e-givers donate more of their salaries to their church than others do. That means they give more often, and they also tend to give more cumulative. I won't necessarily say each contribution is more, but they give more cumulative. So it's a higher percentage of their income. This is one of the challenges that we've faced as we look at congregations, because what we find is as income goes up, giving does not often parallel that, which means the giving is not in proportion to the increase in income. I've worked with congregations who have seen a one-third increase in household income in their congregations, and they found a one-third decrease in the percentage that they give to their church.
Wow.
The concept of proportionate giving is something that we teach and emphasize, but that doesn't happen in all congregations.
Yeah.
Next point, Ken.
Yep.
So the next one here is age isn't a barrier to e-giving. when this survey first started about 4 years ago, it was very clear from the data that younger people tended to do more of the e-giving than older people. But now that has balanced out much more evenly. Churchgoers across all age groups are comfortable doing e-giving. And I think that's for a variety of reasons. One, I think older people are more comfortable using mobile phones than they've been in the past. I think also the security that's around these systems for giving has improved and people are comfortable with that. The process has gotten easier. Those are 3 reasons why I think this continues to grow and become more popular. Next, Ken. Churchgoers want to pay for events and activities with cards and smartphones. So it's not only an offering, it's other events and activities that are in the congregation. And this is a particularly important income stream for some congregations, and the ease of being able to make those payments through e-giving is part of what helps people to do that more easily, and to convince them, oh, I can just take care of this real easy using my e-giving. So that's an important piece. Next is a place that we look at. Convenience is more important than processing cost. I'm going to say a word about processing cost. Processing cost can vary from service company to service company, but generally, because of the competition in this marketplace, that processing cost has been dropping. And so the actual financial service companies make a very small % on that processing fee, and it's becoming more and more competitive. There are more than 50 companies in the gift processing business, okay, who are looking to talk with churches, more than 50 of them. And so there's a lot of competition that's out there. I think the other piece to look at is of checks. Ken mentioned before about 9/11 and the influence that had on checks. But what we see, the cost of a check is also going up. And so it's where that cost of a check passes the cost of doing an e-gift is where we're beginning to see that shift is starting to occur. Churchgoers understand that there are fees, and many say they will give more to cover them. In fact, that we've found as we've looked at the e-giving that goes on in our congregations, the majority of donors pay the fee. So what this means is that if you were to have, just for round numbers, if you had a fee that was 2.5% and 50% of the people pay it, then the net cost to the congregation on average is about 1.25%. So that means that the cost for e-giving really is going down and will continue to go down as volume increases. So those are some of the trends that we see that come through the research as we look at that.
Great.
One other piece that we have here is a chart. I think the chart's next. Yes. And this is an interesting chart that shows e-givers are more involved in church activity than traditional givers. Okay, so this is by asking people who give electronically and asking about their participation in different events. Okay, now I think we need to keep in perspective here that many of the people that do e-giving are the people who are more active in the congregation and more active leaders in the congregation. But nevertheless, we see here that e-giving is more common and a more regular practice of people who are leaders in congregations, which means they are also people who are more likely to do recurring giving, which we're going to talk about as being one of the key factors, wanting to do recurring giving.
Great.
That's some of the information from this particular research. This is done each year, and so it's kind of interesting to look at that and see what some of the changes are. So,
Keith, let me ask you then. Selecting an e-giving service provider, what are the recommendations that you make to congregations about what to look at, what questions to ask, what kind of things they want to weigh in the mix as they're comparing, because there are so many of them out there,
right,
with doing their e-giving one way or as opposed to another.
So I've got a list here that I will share. And this, interestingly enough, just this last week in my office, I got a call from a company that I had not heard from before. who they say they have about 30,000 e-giving customers, and they're interested in having our denomination become one of their customers. And so these are the kind of questions that I would go through and ask them if they want to be considered. The first of those is, what makes the services you provide different from other e-service providers? What's different? And what we're looking at there is, what kind of products do you have? How long does it take to set up? What's the ease of use? What's the integration of the giving for those products? How do you offer recurring giving? And what are the options you have for covering fees? Those are some of the kinds of things we're looking at in terms of products and services. We're also concerned about the financial health of the company. What's your ability to fund your current activities? And what is it to fund the growth? This is one of the big things in the last 2 months that's been significant, is what resources do some of these e-giving companies have to keep up with the increased number of orders, and how quickly can they process that and process the giving so that it goes through the system as quickly as possible. What is their capacity and their financial health? Next, we talk about how are they meeting that increasing demand, and that's part of that is being able to meet the increased volume. We also talk about the technology platform they use. How expandable, how dependable is it? We talk then about what is the systems integration? How is it automated? How do you do file transfer? If there's information and giving information, does it transfer automatically? Does it have to be downloaded? How does that happen? We talk about what's their level of security, right? What is called the payment card industry data security compliance number that they have. And those are scored 1, 2s, and 3s. You want to make sure there's a high score of security, and a high score is actually a low number. So a 1 is higher or a better security score than a 3. And what is the fee structure that you have? What's the monthly fee? What's the transaction fee? What's the percentage of contributions that you charge? And what are your contract terms? Are these contracts or are these month to month? These are some of the kinds of things that we're taking a look at and when we talk with e-service providers or e-giving providers about what they have to offer. So Ken, those are some of the things that we're looking at in terms of selecting a service provider. But then we're also trying to think about on the other side of that coin, what kind of support is necessary in the congregation for the congregation to be able to do their to stay on top of their e-giving. Most often we find that a congregation has a contact person. Sometimes it's an administrative person in the office, an office manager, a secretary, a clerk, an accountant who's doing that work. And they're the one who's really kind of monitoring what's coming in and how it's being processed. But one of the seeds that we're trying to plant right now is the suggestion that it may be helpful to have someone who is a coordinator who takes a look at that giving and looks at the numbers and looks at the trends and talks, in fact, with what is called a giving coach. Many of the e-giving companies have what are called giving coaches. And these are people who monitor the activity in your congregation and will give you suggestions about how to increase giving based on the patterns that they see in your congregation. Now, a pattern might be that you see more or less text giving, as an example, or more or less mobile giving. And so they're in the position to be able to talk about how do we address some of those shifts and changes, and how do we communicate with that with social media and a variety of other tools. So these are people giving coaches with some of the e-giving companies who are uniquely positioned to have that kind of conversation. And that usually is not done with the technical person who's handling the processing, but somebody who's trying to monitor how is that e-giving growing in our congregation. So that's a direction that we're trying to encourage congregations to go right now, to identify someone who will watch the numbers and stay on top of that. When I say watch the numbers, I mean aggregate numbers. We're looking at aggregate numbers, okay? We're looking at what's the level of mobile giving, what's the level of other offering giving? How does that break down so that we're watching what the change is in the mix of giving in the congregation, and how does that shape what we communicate to our members about giving? So we're trying to watch the patterns. Those are the key things. Okay. Now, Ken, of course, website giving is an important piece there. And what are some of the keys that you've seen to effective website giving?
Yeah, let me talk about that. Before I do that, I want to apologize. I actually, my internet was kind of fading out and dropped me out, and so I'm back in now. But Marcia, you may want to have the slide deck ready in case it fades out on me again, and I don't get I can't get enough to get back in. But I'll keep going with it and try to kind of talk about that. These are some of the things I think are important as I talk to churches about integrating their online giving into their congregational website. One of the things that I think is crucial is that the place to do the giving should really look like it's something that belongs to your website, that it's integrated into the church's website. So it doesn't look like people are going off somewhere else to give and then coming back to the site. So many of the vendors now can actually match the colors scheme that's a part of your website. So it really looks like it's something very integrated into your system. It should be simple to navigate. One of the things I recommend to folks is, not just on your homepage, but on other pages across your website where people are looking at the good things that are happening in your church, they're looking at faith formation, they're looking at disciple making, they're looking at mission projects. In all those places, somewhere up in the corner, there should be a place for people to click on the give or donate to respond to that. And so it really shouldn't be something that's hard for people to find. They shouldn't have to go through 3 menus to find it. So navigating to that giving site should be easy. It should look like it belongs to you, like they're still on the page. It's actually your giving provider. One of the things that I find, is very helpful is there a way for me to put my information in once, and that the portal site will remember my information, so I'm not asked to put in credit card account information or those kind of things, each time that I get on. This becomes especially important as we become more and more mobile based, and people are working not off a keyboard in front of a monitor or on a laptop, but they're working sometimes from their phones, that they don't have to try and enter in 12 digits of a credit card and all the information that goes along with them. Hopefully you can provide with your vendor an opportunity for people to get a notification or a receipt, if you want to call it, responded to them after they give. Or if they pre-programmed their giving through recurring giving, a notification that comes to them the morning that their gift is going to be transferred, to say, your gift is going to be, taken from your account and sent here, whatever. And that gives people some reminder of that's happening. That feels good to the giver. That's it. I get a message like that in the morning, when our gift is scheduled, and it feels good to me to say, hey, I feel good that my gift is gone. One of the things that I personally like to find on a website in the donation part is that there's an opportunity to give a special gift in memory or honor of someone. I am not one when I know that someone who's been part of one of my church families has passed away. I'm not a big one to send flowers, but I would love to make a gift to the church in their honor or in their memory. And if your vendor can provide an opportunity for you to do that, that's wonderful. Even better than that, the next level up from that is when they give you an opportunity to send an acknowledgement to the family of the person who has passed away, or to the person that you want to honor. Someone from, is having a 90th birthday. They don't need any gifts. They don't need any more in their lives, but you can make a gift to their church in honor of them and have a note generated saying, Ken Sloane made a birthday gift in your honor, and here's his message, happy birthday. And that kind of stuff happens. And then finally, as I keep saying, and you're going to be tired of hearing it, be sure that there's a lot of choices for recurring giving options. People get paid in different ways. For many people, a monthly recurring gift is what they want to do. For some people, they get paid weekly or bi-weekly. That option should be in there. Look at the options there are to make it easier for folks to give on a recurring basis. And I think that's going to be a crucial thing as you're kind of coming down and kind of planning all of this into your website environment. Okay, so
what are some of the challenges that you're seeing, Ken, as you look at e-giving in congregations?
Hold on a second. What am I seeing? Oh, yeah. As I see it, I see people are looking for that kind of opportunity to do both. And I often find people feel threatened by it because they feel like this is taking the place of the offering and the worship. And what I say to them is, all we're doing here is we're offering more options. We're not saying to people, this is the only way that we're going to do this. The only way we're going to allow you to give is by an envelope in this particular way. So what people find is those options are great, and they find that it gives them more things. Now, what is the resistance that we find sometimes? What are some of the challenges that come along with it? I think some of the challenges that we run into are, well, before I talk about that, I think, Keith, you were going to do a little more, you were going to tell us a little more about generational differences before I get into the challenges. Hold on a second. I think that's what we were going to talk about.
That's right. Some generational differences. And this again comes from that churchgoer survey, which talks about ages 35 to 44 are 2 times as likely to give with a mobile app compared with those that are younger. So this is based on survey again of over 1,000 donors. And this is a pattern that has been seen consistently, that ages 35 to 44 are more likely to give with a mobile app than people who are younger. Next point, as you look at some of the demographics.
Hold on a second. Here we go. There you go.
Yep. Churchgoers age 35 are among more enthusiastic about selecting a cause. And so I think we're kind of aware of that younger givers tend to give more specifically to causes. However, one of the trends that we've seen is that other age groups are moving in that same direction. And most notably in the 2009 research is that age group 55 to 65 were very close and almost the same percentage in wanting to direct their gifts to a specific cause. So we think this is part of the larger trend that people have to want to give something specific. They want to know where it's going to go, how it's going to have an impact. Okay. Now, again, that's why working with e-giving companies, you want to be able to give information about your general fund, but you want to be able to easily add additional funds that people might want to give to. Among churchgoers ages 25 to 44, far more than half would pay with a card or a smartphone. So over 50% would prefer to pay that way than writing a check or to be giving by cash. So that's kind of what was illustrated by that story I shared earlier from North Dakota, is that younger people want to use a card or a cell phone, a smartphone, to be able to make their contributions. So there are some distinct generational differences that are there, but some of those differences are starting to narrow as people get more and more familiar with e-giving.
Great. Okay, so back to your question that you asked me about the challenges. There's that basic resistance to change in many of our congregations that people, sometimes people, will say to me, well, this is the way, passing the plate is the way the church has always funded its ministry. And I want to say, always, like, for 2,000 years? I don't think so. There's been a variety of different ways. Even the church in this country has done all kinds of different ways to fund ministry, from selling pew spaces to taking money from the government to support church giving, the whole variety of kind of things. So there's a basic resistance to change, and we just say, you know what? The offering has been part of one of the ways that has been used to fund mission and ministry in the church, but it's been just one of those ways. And it's how we've kind of adapted into the kind of situation that we're in now, and it will continue to change, and change will be part of it. there's a resistance, as Keith talked about, to the fees. And I think he spoke to that really well about, giving people the option to pick up some of those fees. When I talk to folks about it, I say, if you have one of your best giving families that does recurring giving, and they wind up coming and finishing their their pledge at the end of the year, that amount, that difference in there from just a couple of people will cover all the fees from anybody who's using electronic giving. And the image that I use for folks is when I started in ministry, we went out and bought envelopes for everybody in the church. Nobody ever objected to that cost of doing that. I would try to get as many people to pick them up in church as I could, but inevitably I'd have half or even more than that I had to mail to people, and there'd be a postage cost on those. And nobody ever questioned there was a fee involved in that. We understood at that time, and this is going back a few years, we understood that there was, sort of a cost of doing mission and ministry, of raising the funds we needed to do the mission and ministry that we had to do. And we understood it. The cost of doing business is the way they refer to it, the commercial side. And so fees, as they come to us, are the cost of funding mission and ministry, in the same way that envelopes were. There is the whole idea of technophobia and trust. And I think Keith struck on that real well when he was talking about vendors and about their compliance to security levels. You don't want to do things in a way that are just going to kind of put people's basic information at risk, or put the church's funds at risk. I consulted with a church one time. It was actually a church that Bridget and I were attending for a short time, and they didn't offer electronic giving, and we were in that same spot of the only check we wrote anymore was the check to this little church. And so Bridget was on their church council, and again, it was a small church, and I got to sit in the back of the room because I wasn't on the council, and all of a sudden I heard them talking about, well, we looked at electronic giving, but we thought maybe we'll just give out the church's account and the routing number to people and just put those in the bulletin so they can give. And I kind of was getting squirmy, excuse me. And I said, folks, that's not going to work. It's not what we want to do. So again, to find a reliable, trustworthy way of doing our work. Excuse me one second. You want to, I encourage people to build critical mass. And I also remind them to embrace that moment of the giving, that offering moment. Keith, what kind of challenges do you see from congregations when you talk about this?
Well,
Guys, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to interrupt you here because we are almost at time.
All right.
So you all have the notes, and I would assume that both Keith and Ken would be willing to answer questions if you would reach out to them individually, and I can provide that contact information for you. But I want to make sure that we have a little bit of time for questions. Did you have much more that you wanted to share before we go to the questions?
I think Keith was going to talk a little bit about our long range plans, and I think we can probably skip over that to go to questions. Keith, are you okay with that? Or
that's fine.
I think that pretty much was the last thing we were going to talk. I was going to talk a little bit about the world, the new normal that's coming, but let's go ahead to questions.
All right, well, thanks much. Maybe that'll be for future Academy. So we do have some already, and we'll see how many we can do here in about
couple minutes.
7 minutes.
Okay.
So first, just to say that there is a request, Keith, for your questions. So we will share that with all the presenters. And let's see. I'm going to skip around with these. I do most of my charitable giving by credit card. The only organizations that ask for reimbursement of fees are church-related. Those requests cause me to fear that the church is communicating a lack of gratitude. Your thoughts?
We haven't found that to be true. First of all, we want congregations to thank donors for their gifts, but we found that that percentage of households or percentage of donors that cover that fee has been continuing to increase, right? And so we think that number is gonna continue on a trend to a certain point. Don't know where the peak of that point is, but it's past the 50% range. So we've been encouraged by that. Remember that there are usually two decisions in that process. One is the congregation has to decide if they want to make that option available, and two, then the donor has to make the decision of whether they want to cover that. So there's two important decisions to be made there. But we have seen very little resistance to that.
Yeah, I don't really have any data to that, and I do, as I think about it now, I do find that experience that that's the only place really that I have kind of seen that opportunity to you know, people ask for the fees. The other thing that I'd mention that if you haven't gotten involved in this, the question that I get often is to say, if the church only gets on $100 gift only gets $96.50 or something like that, is that what we, you know, record and acknowledge? And I say, no, you record and acknowledge what the donor gave. And again, that fee money, as I said earlier, is part of your operating expenses for raising that money. And so again, I really believe, as Keith has said too, if folks are willing to donate a little more and do that, again, that amount should be acknowledged to them. But the reality is the consistency of the giving is going to make such a difference in how you end up at the end of the year and how you fund that. You know, if it's not an option in the event that the church decides that they're on the fence about it, you're going to come out much better when people are open to setting up that recurring giving.
Back to your graph about giving and involvement.
Yes.
Is this a chicken egg effect? Which came first? Does involvement stimulate a desire to e-give or vice versa?
I think it's the involvement that came first and the e-giving came second, is what I think in many cases.
Yeah. The graph was made by the company that is helping encourage people to sign up to do the e-giving. So they've kind of flipped it, I think. But yeah, I think Keith kind of identified it pretty well.
Right. And here's someone who agrees that they have seen opportunities to care for the fees in other nonprofits. So thanks for sharing that.
Good.
I'm going to combine a couple questions together here. Best practices in worship. I'm going to kind of interpret and incorporate this. How can you incorporate online giving into worship if, as you stated, that's where most of the giving happens?
Well, as what we've seen in some of our congregations is they are taking time during worship to talk about giving. They are inviting people to make a gift. They're usually giving people several different options, e-giving being one option, putting a check in the mail, stopping by, dropping it by the church, a number of different options, whatever options are appropriate for your context. But also letting people know during that time, here's a few minutes to do that, and whether they play music or whether they tell a story, how that giving makes an impact, how the work of their congregation makes an impact in the community that they serve. There's a story that goes with it, and they're combining those usually in about a 3-minute segment in that online worship. Yeah.
I would just add to that there are ways to prompt giving at that time, inviting folks to take out their phones, providing a QR code for people that, they can take a picture of, that'll take them to the giving site. Again, as Keith has said, a story or whatever, or something special in worship, which, would inquire people to give a special gift, or, to get a lot of people, would you be willing to give a small gift in addition to what you give? But a text prompt that can either come to people, or they have a number they can put in, and you put it on a screen or the QR code, that gives people that opportunity to, right there in the midst, when they're kind of in the spirit and touched by what's happening, to make that response.
Great, thank you. very quickly, a question was asked about social media giving. And if the two of you don't have a response to that one, I do, but I will let you start off.
Like a donut pay, a donate button like on Facebook. Is that kind of what you think they're talking about, Marcia?
Yes, yes.
Well, there's so many opportunities for, you know, people to do their own GoFundMe and things like that or whatever. I just would, one of the questions I always say to people is I don't put down any of those options for people to raise money. I said, just be sure that people who donate are going to be able, that they're donating in a way that will qualify them for this being a charitable donation if they want to use it at a later time. I would hate to see somebody, you know, participate in a GoFundMe case thinking that they're doing a charitable donation, and I find the line is getting very fuzzy right now when people will do a GoFundMe for any kind of idea that comes along, that they make that distinction clearly. But Marcia, you have a comment on it. I'd be anxious to hear what you've got to say.
I do, and if you haven't visited the Ecumenical Stewardship Center website yet, there is a white paper that goes through 9 different kinds of giving beyond the offering plate. And what I can tell you about Facebook Donate Now specifically is that you can wait up to 6 weeks to get your gift. Because just like Ken and Keith have described, Facebook has to go through an electronic giving platform themselves. Yeah. And the person who set up the Facebook Donate Now page, and this is not intuitive, has the choice of 3 different platforms that they can choose. And one of those is a 6-week time lag. Wow. And I'm speaking from organizational experience here. So with social media, with any of the things that Keith and Ken have described, anything you find on the ESC webpage, the 3 words that I'm going to leave you with is do your homework. Yeah. Make sure that you understand what all is involved, and have your plans in place before you go to the provider, and then you don't have the information you need. Yeah.
One of the things that I have discovered is that through other work we were doing with the United Methodist Church, people want to say, can you ask people at a gathering when they're excited about something to text to give? And the people can actually give through their phones, but it goes through the phone vendor, and they take about half of it. So when I talk about people about using, you know, your phone in worship text to give, what I'm talking about is you text and a link comes back that takes you to your donation site that your church has already set up. And that's the distinction there that's, I think, is good to make too. So thanks, Marcia. That's good.
Yes. Well, thank you both. And again, we'll get those questions that Keith shared to you. And we are going to take a break now until 45 past the hour. And then we will hear from Davey Gerhard with our last workshop of the day. And
thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you again for those of you who have given. And as soon as Ken stops sharing his screen, okay, I will share one more time our screen where you can make a donation today.
I'm trying to get rid of it. Hold on.
That's okay.
Here we are.
There we go.
There we go. It's all yours.
All right. And thank you again. And we'll see you at 45 past the hour.